watching the English newscast here on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's headlines. Telecommunications Minister Boutros Harib dismisses criticism targeting the work of his ministry in the illegal internet scandal. At least 10 people, including 7 children, are killed in airstrikes on the rebel held east of Aleppo in Syria. U.S. President Barack Obama says the Syrian government continues to violate a truce in the war, and Russia's actions in Syria raise questions about its intentions in the country. Telecommunications Minister Boutros Harib has dismissed criticism targeting the work of his ministry in the illegal internet scandal. He said in a lengthy news conference that a report he submitted to Cabinet on the situation in the state-owned Ojero Telecommunications Company was comprised of 19 pages but included supplementary documents. They accused us of seeking to confuse the Cabinet. These are only malicious and trivial conflicts, Harib said, stressing that he accepts constructive criticism but will not allow false charges. He reiterated that the major accomplishment of his ministry was the fiber optic project, and his plan to cover the whole country with 4G services in preparation for the launching of the 5G connection by the year 2020. Lebanon's health ministry has announced that some funds for public hospitals to pay their workers have been transferred to their accounts. A statement issued by the ministry said around $10,600 were transferred to public hospitals through the finance ministry. The figure is the amount owed to public hospitals for treating health ministry patients, the statement said, as it called on the directors of hospitals to pay all workers without delay using their newly transferred funds. Several public hospitals across the country have been delaying the salaries of the staff over financial crises. Recently, staff at the Sidon Public Hospital and the state-owned Rafiq Hariri University Hospital held a protest over unpaid wages. Now for some news on the ground in Syria. At least 10 people, including 7 children, were killed in airstrikes on the rebel held east of Aleppo. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said it was unclear if the raids on Aleppo's Majid district were carried out by aircraft belonging to the Syrian government or its ally Russia. The latest civilian deaths come as rebels press an assault intended to break a government siege of opposition-held Aleppo that began on July 17th. And has raised fears of a humanitarian crisis. The assault started on Sunday and is targeting the Ramusa district that contains the main supply route to the government held west of the city. The observatory says at least 112 civilians, including 33 children, have been killed in Aleppo since the rebel assault began. U.S. President Barack Obama touted progress the United States and its allies have made in the military campaign against Islamic State, though he said the militant group still has the ability to direct and inspire attacks. Obama said the Syrian government continues to violate a truce in the war there, and Russia's actions in Syria raise questions about its intentions in the country. In his words,
in Syria, as I've repeatedly said, defeating ISIL and al-Qaeda requires an end to the civil war and the Assad regime's brutality against the Syrian people, which pushes people into the arms of extremists. The regime and its allies continue to violate the cessation of hostilities, including with vicious attacks on defenseless civilians, medieval sieges against cities like Aleppo, and blocking food from reaching families that are starving. It is deplorable, and the depravity of the Syrian regime has rightly earned the condemnation of the world. Russia's direct involvement in these actions over the last several weeks raises very serious questions about their commitment to pulling the situation back from the brink. The U.S. remains prepared to work with Russia to try to reduce the violence and strengthen our efforts against ISIL and al-Qaeda in Syria. But so far, Russia has failed to take the necessary steps. Given the deteriorating situation, it is time for Russia to show that it is serious about pursuing these objectives.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan vows to choke off businesses linked to U.S.-based cleric Fethullah Gulen, who he blames for an attempted coup. That's coming up next. welcome back. You're watching the English newscast. The UNHCR says fighters from the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant have reportedly captured up to 3,000 fleeing villagers in northern Iraq. In its daily report on events in Iraq, the UN Refugee Agency said 12 of the captives were thought to have been executed by ISIL. The report followed a statement from the Iraqi Observatory for Human Rights, which said about 1,900 civilians had been captured by an estimated 120 IS fighters who were using people as shields against attacks by Iraqi security forces. U.S.-based cleric Fethullah Gulen says the warrant out for his arrest further shows President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's drive for authoritarianism. An Istanbul court issued an arrest warrant for the cleric for allegedly giving the instructions for the coup attempt, the latest of several warrants issued against him in recent years on charges including running a criminal network. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan vowed to choke off businesses linked to Gulen, who he blames for an attempted coup, describing his schools, firms and charities as nests of terrorism and promising no mercy in rooting them out. In a speech from his palace, Erdogan also said those who financed the shooters will be treated like the coup plotters themselves. More than 230 people were killed, excluding soldiers who were involved in the coup attempt. Many of the dead were civilians.
I think, this case has two sides. One is political side, the other one is judicial side. And as a representative, as a part of the political side, we are here, representing different political wings in the parliament to talk about what happened at that night and to talk about, that we are facing a very well organized and, undercover sort of terrorist organization. But on the other hand, of course, so far we have been contacting, with different authorities from the state side. And as far as we get information from them, the judicial side has already started the process, and they said, they have received 85 big boxes of documents, and they are in the process of evaluating these documents, and the process is still ongoing from the judicial side.
So the U.S. Department has received...
That's what we are receiving the news from them, yes.
They've received
And
85.
two sides are in contact with each other now.
First of all, you had never seen such a cheap tactical moves from Turkey in the past. And I'm quite sure, unless many extraordinary things are structurally happens, you wouldn't see such a cheap tactical moves, Because U.S.-Turkish bilateral relationship is a historic one, structural, politically sound and firm relations. Although there are ups and downs, it's quite normal. It happens with many bilateral relationships, especially if you are in the shoes of Turkey. We know where we are living. We are quite aware of our geography. We are aware of political, economic crisis happening around us. And although all those crises are happening, so far Turkey is the only country in the region still economically stable, politically stable. It's not easy.
The United Nations says government soldiers and security forces in South Sudan executed civilians and gang-raped women and girls during and after ethnically charged fighting last month in the capital Juba. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein has called on the government of President Salva Kiir to prosecute perpetrators and urged world powers in the UN Security Council to take urgent action to halt violence.
Well, our preliminary investigations find that there have been really widespread human rights violations in Juba since 5 days of fighting broke out on the 8th of July. The majority of these violations, a great majority of these violations, appear to have been committed by government forces, by the SPLA. They include killings, summary executions of civilians as well as fighters. They include a lot of looting, of destruction of property, and perhaps most disturbing, a very high number of attacks on women, apparently on an ethnic basis for the most part, 217 cases that we are aware of so far, and obviously there could well be many more. There's one road heading to the southwest out of Juba towards a town called Ye, and that road seems to be particularly bad. We know of around at least 100 cases of women who were raped or gang raped on that road in various different locations. Sometimes large groups, and it was mainly at checkpoints. So it was government checkpoints, presumably set up to catch opposition fighters fleeing the city, but they were using their position to prey on women.
Egypt's former Grand Mufti Ali Jum'a, once one of the country's top religious authorities, survived an assassination attempt. Security sources said 2 men on a motorcycle fired guns on Jum'a as he entered a mosque, after which they immediately fled the scene. The Mufti was unharmed, and one of his bodyguards received a minor injury to the foot. Like many of the top religious figures in the Egyptian state, Jum'a is an adherent of a mystical school of Islam known as Sufism, whose practices have sometimes set them at odds with more puritanical Muslims, including hardline Islamist groups. Jum'a is an outspoken critic of Islamist groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood, and is also close to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. An American tourist has been killed and 5 others injured following a knife attack in central London. The victims injured in the attack were from the United States, Australia, Israel, and the UK, while the slain American tourist was identified as 60-year-old Darlene Horton from Florida. London Metropolitan Police say they have arrested one suspect who has been identified as a 19-year-old Norwegian national of Somali descent. Security measures across the city have been stepped up in response to the attack. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. Telecoms Minister Boutros Ghali dismisses criticism targeting the works of his ministry in the illegal internet scandal. At least 10 people, including 7 children, are killed in airstrikes on the rebel-held east of Aleppo. U.S. President Barack Obama says the Syrian government continues to violate a truce in the war, and Russia's actions in Syria raise questions about its intentions in the country. Those are your top stories in English from us here at Future Television. I'm Linda Tamimna. Thank you all for watching.